Hello, I'm Alan Kohler, founder of Eureka Report, which is now part of Intelligent Investor, and a columnist and a finance presenter for the ABC.
And I'm James Thomson, senior Chanticleer columnist at the Australian Financial Review.
And we are the Money
Café.
On Liberation Day, James.
Liberation Day. Don't you feel liberated, Alan? Doesn't it feel good?
I don't at all.
Sweet taste of freedom coursing through our veins.
So you wrote quickly about it this morning for Chanticleer. Just tell us what you said. It was basically you focused on uncertainty, which is reasonable.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a lot that we sort of don't know about the tariffs at this stage because we didn't get what we expected. We expected a 20% baseline tariff across everyone. Instead, we got a 10% tariff on as a baseline, and then lots of individual tariffs of really much of epic proportions, I've got to say. So there's a 34% extra tariff on China, which takes their total tariff to 54%. There's a 24% tariff on Japan we didn't see coming. There's really high tariffs on all the countries that people have gone to get around China. So Vietnam and Cambodia, Malaysia, they've all got high tariffs on them. So the sort of end game here, or the sums, are that the average tariff across the American economy has risen from 2% at the start of this year to about 29% on numbers from a mob called Evercore. So now, Alan, to your point about uncertainty, if that was it, that might be okay. But the problem is that we've got this messaging coming out of the White House which suggests, you know, there's room for negotiation. These tariffs might be the high watermark, but they might come down. There's no definitive notion of how long the tariffs might last. And so I guess my point is, you know, financial markets see this as an event. You know, tariffs come in, we reprice everything, life goes on. But imagine trying to run a business out there and you're trying to make decisions, particularly a globally exposed business, which so many Australian businesses are because of the nature of our economy. How hard is it to decide whether you're going to press the button on that new project? How hard is it to decide whether you're going to hire those new people? All of these decisions are just going to stop. And I think that's the danger that we face now, that a total freeze on spending by businesses in the economy could, it's definitely going to hit the US and potentially push the US into recession, but that could spread around the world. Even for places like Australia that look relatively safe from most of the tariff hit. So that's my point. I mean, this wasn't what they call in financial markets a clearing event where everything becomes settled. This has just unleashed more uncertainty, and Trump just doesn't seem to care. I mean, the stupidity of this, the sort of self-harm is baffling. It's breathtaking. Do you understand what he's trying to do here, Alan?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I doubt that he understands it really. But, I mean, it's worth noting a couple of things just in terms of what you're saying about uncertainty. The fact sheet on the White House website says that these tariffs will remain in effect until such time as President Trump determines that the threat posed by the trade deficit is satisfied, resolved, or mitigated. It also contains modification authority allowing President Trump to increase the tariff if trading partners retaliate, or decrease the tariffs if trading partners take steps to remedy them. So basically the whole thing, the way that the whole thing's framed is that it's entirely at President Trump's whim as to what happens from here. I mean, there's no certainty at all. In fact, they're designed to be not certain.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I guess he wants that to be a position of power to negotiate from.
Well, he certainly wants it to be in his power to change them or do what he likes.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is the case in general, but still it's sort of explicitly said that it'll stay in place until he determines that it's not needed.
Yeah.
The other thing worth noting is that the tariffs are imposed under what's called the the emergency the IEEP Emergency Powers Act, which is basically it's a declaration of national emergency. It's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 that gives him the power to do these things. And in order to do it, he has to declare a national emergency, which he's done. So it's a kind of really a weird thing. And I was looking on the...
Is that to get around Congress to some extent?
Yeah, that's right. So it enables him to do it as opposed to Congress.
Yeah.
But I look, if you look on the Wikipedia page for this, there's a Wikipedia page for this act, and then it's got a list of the current emergencies that are active now.
Yeah.
And there's 45 of them.
Wow. Oh gosh, we've been living in relative calm for too long.
Yeah, like with there's a few that Trump has declared this year already. So the Mexico tariff and the Canada tariff and the China tariff that he's already announced, they were all imposed under this act.
Gotcha.
The Emergency Act. But there's still plenty that were done by Biden. Turkey, China, Myanmar, Russia. Oh God, it's incredible. Anyway, that's a sort of a side light, I suppose. I mean, the amazing thing is that he's calling these reciprocal tariffs, but of course, the tariffs that on American imports to the countries concerned are made up. I mean, it's like the 10% tariff on Australia that he's now imposed is meant to be in reciprocation to a tariff that Australia imposes on America, but we don't. It's not true. That's simply made up. So it's basically a 10%. So if you look on the list that he's published,
yes,
it says there that Australia imposes a 10% tariff on America, but it's not the case.
Yeah. Do we impose any tariffs on America? I mean, there are some.
No, none, zero.
Right.
So could we have a free trade agreement with America? It's basically we've got a free trade agreement, and so there aren't any tariffs, and they've just made it up that we impose 10% tariff so that they can impose 10% tariff on us.
I mean, how do you negotiate with that? It's just sort of fake news and disinformation layered upon uncertainty. Oh, I mean, it's just hard to know where it goes. I think, in my view, markets have reacted fairly calmly to all this.
Well, certainly the Australian market has. It's down, 2% today, something?
Yeah, well, and I think it's even clawed back to be down about 1.2% as we speak on Thursday afternoon. Well, I think that's a remarkable level of calmness shown by Australian investors.
That's true. So what stocks the stocks that are down are the miners, Rio, BHP, Fortescue are all down 2+%. Macquarie's down 2.8%.
Yeah.
Goodman down 3.3%. The banks are up. CSL's up a bit.
Yep.
James Hardie 2.7% up. So so the reason the market's down is because the miners have sold off. Fair enough. It's just who knows what the hell's going to happen.
Yeah,
I guess.
And I think this is going to take, coming back to my point on uncertainty, I think this is going to take some time for investors to work through this, because the companies that people are buying, they're working through that. We've had a number of companies say to the ASX, including Kohler and Breville, for example. I mean, two sort of disparate companies, one in medical devices, one in small appliances, coffee machines and the like. Both of them have said, well, we'll let you know what's happening when we figure it out. And I think it's the calculus that's going to be going on for possibly months. Oh, well, we don't know. We'll have to figure it out. That is a really hard environment to invest in.
Yes.
And for businesses to make decisions. So I think this is hugely, hugely worrying. And it's going to be tough for markets to adjust to this. They weren't all that well prepared for it.
Which is interesting. That in itself is interesting. I mean, within an hour of Trump's announcement, JP Morgan put out a statement to their investors saying, we view the full implementation of these policies as a substantial macroeconomic shock, not currently incorporated in our forecasts. These policies, if sustained, would likely push the US and global economy into recession this year.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, why weren't they incorporated into their forecasts?
Well, I guess there was just such a wide range of outcomes. And this gets back to the other part of the stupidity around this. From all the reporting we've seen coming out of America, virtually up until Trump opened his gob in the Rose Garden at the White House, nobody seemed to know exactly what the tariff policy would contain. There seemed to be several options on the table. I'm sorry, think about the federal budget. That's decided weeks out. This is just policy on the run, and it's just mind-boggling that you could be still working this out on the day. I just can't believe it. And I think that's what investors have been struggling with, and even the likes of JP Morgan. Like, how do you price this when you don't know? And even today, how do you price it when it's still very unclear where this all ends up?
Yeah. Well, it does look like we're in for trade wars. I mean, you'd have to say that unless things change pretty soon, there's going to be a US and global recession.
Yes.
So, okay, I reckon you have to now price that, or at least assume that. And that suggests a bear market. I mean, when you have recessions, stocks go into a bear market.
Yeah, I think that's what you need to be thinking about. There's a few interesting sort of counter arguments to that, Alan. One is that China's reaction could be quite meaningful, particularly down here in Australia. If they see this tariff hit and go, right, we've been talking about stimulus for, I don't know, the best part of a year and a half. It's time to open the taps and kitchen sink this, to mix a few crappy metaphors. We could see a sizable financial stimulus package announced in China. And that could be pretty good news for Australian miners and Australian exporters. So there are a few combinations and permutations here where perhaps it's good for Australian markets. But, generally, US recessions are not happy moments for Australian investors and Australian savers. And look, think of how big our super sector is. We're more exposed to this than ever, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Well, the super sector, the superannuation is exposed to the stock market in a big way, not just to the Australian market, but to American and global markets.
Yeah.
So yes, this is not a good time to be retiring.
Yes. Look, I mean, you've had a good couple of years though, haven't you? So there's nothing to be too worried about yet.
I thought one of the best commentaries on this that I've seen this morning was actually published before Trump's announcement, which was by Tom Friedman in the New York Times.
Right.
And if you're not a subscriber to it, I'll just read you a bit of it. He says that he had a choice. He was in Shanghai the other day, and he had a choice which to visit Tomorrowland to visit, the Disneyland in Shanghai or Huawei's.
Right.
And so he decided on Huawei's. And Huawei's, basically, he calls it Tomorrowland, but it's a new research center built just outside Shanghai, the size of 225 football fields, consists of 104 individually designed buildings, manicured lawns, connected by a monorail, housing labs for up to 35,000 scientists, engineers and other workers, with 100 cafes, fitness centers, perks, etc. And it's built by Huawei.
Right.
And basically, Tom Friedman's piece is just about how much China is pouring into technology. And companies like Huawei and others are just kind of absolutely munching into America's lead on technology, which is kind of evaporating. And the thing about the tariffs is it'll just make it evaporate more quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's
China
just
will turn inwards, won't it?
It's a fantasy that tariffs are going to bring jobs and manufacturing back to America. Apart from anything else, Manufacturing these days does not involve jobs.
Yes.
It involves robots, not humans.
Yeah.
And that's kind of more and more the case.
Yeah. I did like, speaking of sort of good bits of commentary, I liked our old mate Victor Schvetz from Macquarie, who sort of pointed out the lack of coherence. His point was that if the objective of this is to raise revenue for tax cuts, then that sort of is in conflict with the idea that American manufacturing is going to be reshored. If you're trying to force down global tariffs, then threats aren't going to work. If you're trying to resurrect manufacturing employment, that's probably going to be undermined by longer lead times, higher costs, and technological replacement. So it's just hard to see how this does anything that sort of fits Trump's grand plan. But here we are.
Victor also says if the objective is to force down global tariffs, then persistent and chaotic threats is likely to have the opposite outcome. If the objective is to resurrect manufacturing employment, higher intermediate costs, long lead times, as you're pointing out, are likely to undermine it. And if the objective is to force global realignment of savings and investments and threatening a de facto sort of a Mar-a-Lago accord, forcing down the US dollar, forcing others to change their private sector behaviour is unhelpful. I mean, you can't get an accord when you're absolutely whacking everyone around the ears.
Exactly.
I mean, so accord is out now with anybody with America, including Australia. I mean, Australia is the most supine of all allies that America has, and we are now saying, hang on, well, you can't have that.
Yeah.
It's
this is going to be a big shakeout. And I think, Alan, have we all underestimated this risk? I mean, so you find even this week I've been talking to investors who assure me, oh, no, he'll step back from the brink. Won't happen. It's all a negotiating tactic. I mean, we've got to discount that now, don't we?
We do.
Maybe
you're right.
not completely, but, Trump's got a grand sort of plan here. It might look pretty incoherent at times, but and there's inconsistencies in the policies, but he's pretty determined to go down this path.
Who was it last week who put out a thing saying that unless Trump blinks, it'll be a bear market? There was that
Macquarie. Macquarie's Australia.
That was Macquarie, that's right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Victor Schvetz, it was somebody else there. They don't actually put the names on the rest of their research, do they?
Yeah, the local strategy team. So
they said unless Trump blinks, there'll be a bear market. So we now know that Trump is not blinking.
No.
Okay, well, I think we've probably gone as far into this as we can, haven't we?
It's endless. I mean, it's just, Alan, I remember we were working together back at Business Spectator in sort of 2008, 2009 when things were unravelling in the GFC. This has got a little bit of the same feel to it, I reckon.
Oh, it does. That's for sure.
It's just sort of every day you wonder what the next blow's going to be. But
and you wake up every morning, a little bit excited. What's going to happen today?
Yes, we shouldn't get. We should mask our excitement, I'm sure, but it's hard when you're sort of seeing history play out in real time.
Yeah. Well, look, unless you're fully invested, it's good news for investors in a way. I mean, it's going to bring prices down. I think there's going to be some good buying this year.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Okay, look, we'll do some questions. Before we get to them, let's have a quick word from our sponsor.
Feeling overwhelmed by market noise? With all the recent headlines, it's understandable. Join Tom Wilson, investor educator and product specialist at InvestSmart, for a free webinar on Tuesday, April 8 at 1 p.m. He'll walk you through smart strategies for tuning out the noise and navigating market volatility. You'll learn how to build and stick to a plan even when markets dip, the behavioral traps to watch out for, and why regular investing beats emotional decision making. Don't let uncertainty hold you back. Register now to join the live session or sign up to receive the recording later. Visit investsmart.com.au/events.
Okay, Daniel says, love your podcast. I have a question regarding housing crises. Is it possible for the RBA to set an interest rate specifically for residential property development, i.e. the building of townhouses, houses and apartments? The answer is no, Daniel. No.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, he's got a thought that the status quo isn't helping us, but I mean, I don't think we want to change the price of money for one sector as a general idea. That introduces distortions that will have unintended consequences that we might not like down the track. So, get the point, but yeah, I don't think it'll work.
Well, money has to be funded, right?
Yeah,
so
it's got to come from somewhere.
The loans have to be funded by deposits or loans, to the banks of some sort, and so in order for that to happen, Daniel, the RBA would not only not have to set an interest rate, a borrowing interest rate for people, they'd have to set a lending or saving interest rate on a particular thing. So they'd have to say, if you're here's an interest rate for general savings, and here's a lower interest rate if you're saving for saving for building of townhouses and apartments. And guess what would happen? Nobody would put any money in it.
Yeah.
There'd be no money.
Yes.
So it would have to be, the only way it would happen would be if the government subsidised the interest rate for the, actually there'd have to be government money coming in, which was unlikely.
Yes, very unlikely. Dawn says, love your work, gentlemen. It seems to me that many coalition policies are half-baked and not well thought out, like the recent proposal to weaken home loan serviceability tests. In my opinion, it will benefit everyone applying for a mortgage and will simply drive prices higher, like the home builder program in the GFs in the COVID crisis. These tests to exist to manage financial risks. It needs to be supply-driven, not more demand-driven. Simple economics. What does Alan, our resident housing guru, think?
Well, I think that the serviceability buffer was increased from 2.5% to 3% in the GFC in response to the GFC, and it's been kept there. So I think there is a case for reducing it because we're not in a GFC anymore, although, maybe now with Donald Trump we are in a GFC, so let's keep it up. So, look, there is a case for reducing it from 3 to 2.5%, but I think that it would make almost no difference to anything. And to the extent that it does, Dawn's right, it would allow people to borrow more and drive prices up. So it certainly is not a way of improving housing affordability.
I wrote a little bit about this week. This issue this week, Alan. I mean, on RBA rate decision day. Now, what's interesting to me is that credit is flowing pretty nicely to the housing market. It doesn't feel great, but total credit growth is running at 6.5% in the economy. Home loan growth is running at 5.6%. Business lending growth is running at 9%, which is a 22-month high. It's hard to argue that credit is being choked off to the housing market. Sure, prices are too high. Lots of people are locked out, but it's not really a lack of. It's not really an inability to get loans. That seems
given what the data you're just talking about, do you think there's a case for responding to what Jonathan Mott was saying at the banking summit about the risk weighting that's favouring the lending to home loans and against lending to businesses, which he was on about? We've been talking about it, and we were talking about that in Money Café at the time as well. But do you think? I mean, given what's going on with lending to business, is there a case for changing that?
Well, lending to business is running. It's running along pretty strongly at the moment. Maybe these two things cancel each other out. I think APRA's going to be pretty careful to be fiddling around with risk weights at the moment. The one idea I liked of Mott's, particularly, he suggested that banks should be able to look past HECS debts, so, university and higher education debts, as they assess the creditworthiness. Little things like that might help at the margin without distorting the market too much. So maybe something like that is where we can look. Further
on interest rates, Chris says, my question is, the RBA have just announced that putting interest rates on hold at 4.1%, one of the main reasons being Trump's tariff wars. how can the RBA justify a rate hold on mortgage owners on what's going on around the world with Trump tariffs? It's not like a mortgage owner has any control whatsoever on what another country decides to do. Is this greed trying to prolong a high interest rate? Also, can someone tell me where does all the money go that we pay extra on interest? Yeah, that's a good question. The final answer to the final question there is, Chris, the money that's going on extra interest is going to the savers who also pay extra interest, because when the Reserve Bank puts interest rates up or down, it changes not only the lending rate but also the borrowing or savings rate. So both sides of the ledger go up at the same time, usually at the same amount, but not always, and that's kind of unfortunately up to the banks to decide. And the thing to watch is, in terms of whether you want to know whether the banks are profiteering or not, is to look at their margin between the cost of the money they bring in and the cost of the money they lend out, and how that margin's changing over time. Over a sort of a decade or two, the margin has come down.
Yes.
Anyway,
very sharply. I guess just to point out, Chris, this gets back to that idea of the RBA doesn't set monetary policy for mortgage holders; it sets monetary policy for the economy. It doesn't have a mandate to carve out homeowners who account for a third of the population. And you could say if they did, they'd be whacking the other 2/3 of the population in the face. Arguably, the one thing I'd say is that money markets are pricing in a cut in May. That the pricing of that cut has gone up on Thursday after the tariff announcement, and economists are now predicting 4 rate cuts in total for 2025. So that would be May and then 2 more. So maybe there's maybe Trump's tariff hit is actually going to provide mortgage holders with a bit of respite, because the fear is that the US economy is going to slow, the global economy is going to slow, Australia's economy is going to slow, and the RBA will have to provide some support to help the economy through that. So there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for in there.
And like all recessions, it'll be fine if you can keep your job.
Yeah, great point.
And also, of course, recessions are not great for small business people who rely on, traffic through the door and, people spending money.
Yeah. Brendan says, I hope you might be able to provide some insight on the recent share price weakness for NextDC. I can understand why they've been moving backwards recently. Like all data centers, CapEx is high to purchase land and expand facilities, but their revenue and earnings are up, and they have cash and quite a bit of undrawn debt. Market cap's currently $7.2 billion. They have well over $5 billion in assets alone, without even considering the growth. I genuinely believe we're all underestimating the value in data centers. I just can't understand the recent weakness in NXT.
Well, they don't make any money. I mean, yeah. I mean, everyone got carried away with data centers earlier this year, and all of the data centers went up too much, including Goodman and Infratil, the other two. They all went up quite a lot, and they've all come down. And they've come down basically the same as the Magnificent Seven tech stocks in the US, all part of the artificial intelligence. So the decline is simply part of the global decline in artificial intelligence and technology stocks.
Yeah, I mean, Brendan says, please don't blame DeepSeek as the reason. I think, but I think, Brendan, this has had a big impact, because it's not so much that anyone's scared of DeepSeek. What they're scared of is the idea that the likes of Microsoft and other big hyperscalers might start to rethink their spending on AI infrastructure, which would flow through to data centers. So to Alan's point, these stocks had run it pretty hard. There's a bit of hot air coming out of them now. I guess the good thing for you is that if you think they're cheap, maybe you can scoop up a bargain.
That's it. They've certainly come down a bit. I mean, they, like everything else, they're possibly going to come down a bit more.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Who knows? Phil says, oh, crike. Hi, Alan. In 2017, the Equity Mates podcast, you said you don't like index funds, and if you were young again, you'd find someone with a track record of earning 15% per annum and give them your money. Where can we go to find 15% per annum or better? I've got a good run with largely passive funds over the last few years, but feel active funds may be a better option for the next few years. Oh, God.
Why did you say this 8 years ago, Alan?
I know. What's the matter with me? Look, there are some fund managers that have been doing 15% better. I'm probably going to ask me now which ones.
Look, I'm going to save you a bit here, Alan. The problem is it's really hard to generate 15% per annum consistently. It's hard to do it. You can do it 1 year. You might be able to do it for 2 or 3 years, but doing it consistently, the stats show that it's hard for active investors. So, Alan could tell you who's done it in the last 2 or 3 years, but it wouldn't be any guarantee that they're going to be able to continue that outperformance, particularly in a moment like this where we're seeing a style shift. If you were long technology stocks and long momentum in the market over the last few years, you've had a cracking couple of years. But it might now be an environment where value and, more careful stock picking and going into some unloved sectors does well. And those guys who are long tech and momentum have a couple of crappy years. So this is the challenge. It's really hard with active managers. There's some great active managers out there, some really thoughtful fundies who we get to talk to. But, picking them and knowing which one's going to do well when is really, really hard.
And they all say past performance is no guide to future performance.
Just like your comments in 2017, Alan.
My past performance is absolutely no guide to my future performance. That's true.
Yeah. So I wouldn't, if you've had a good run with largely passive funds over the last few years, Phil, I wouldn't sort of give up on that completely, but look for some active managers who I guess suit your risk tolerance and style. Some take a very broad view of the market. Some like to go in their best 10 ideas or whatever it is. You just got to find someone that sort of suits your style. It's really hard to recommend.
Yeah, and fund managers do have their performance on their website. I mean, and it's true that past performance is not a decent guide to future performance, but it's all you've got. And so you could just go through, find fund managers' websites, have a look at their past performance, and basically, as long as you understand that it's the past, not the future, and the other thing that is important to note is what James said, that there over the last few years it's been all about growth investing, or momentum investing as it's called, which is the antithesis in a way of the other style of investing called value investing, which is where you buy cheap stocks. Now, back in 2017 when I said that, the best performing funds were value investors in those days, people who just went and bought companies that they thought were undervalued. But ever since then, it's all been about momentum and sticking, buying sort of fast-moving tech stocks and sticking with them, even if they look expensive, because they end up getting more expensive. For example, Pro Medicus, or look, Commonwealth Bank even. Commonwealth Bank was expensive 2 years ago, and it was absolutely a buy, and it just got more and more expensive. So the last few years have been all about momentum and growth investing, but that may be coming to an end. A lot of people are saying that the tide is turning on that now, and that the thing to do is to get back into value, in which case the growth fund managers that have been doing well for the last few years, if that's true, will not do well over the next few years.
Yeah. And
the place to be would be back in value investors, value fund managers. And they, for example, include InvestSmart's Intelligent Investor, which is value investing, and they've been having a terrible time the last few years because value investing hasn't been that rewarding.
Yeah. Jack asks, given that the largest contributors to inflation were the annual movement in food and non-alcoholic beverages, which were up 3.1%, and alcohol and tobacco, which were up 6.7%, could the government forego its cigarette tax excise and allow inflation to fall further and entice the RBA to cut interest rates? Cigarette excise has become a pretty hot topic recently, but Jack, I guess I would say the RBA looks through these sorts of movements. So the RBA sort of ignores particularly food and non-alcoholic beverages inflation. And it would also be discounting that hike in tobacco inflation as they think about interest rates. But, Alan, the government is in a sticky situation with tobacco excise because they've jacked it up so much that they've created this booming black market in smokes that now they're having to sort of try and tame by spending more money. It's a crazy own goal.
I was at dinner with someone last night who was a smoker, and they just went to the Easy Mart store in the CBD. I hope I'm not dobbing someone in. They went to this kind of, an ordinary convenience store called the Easy Mart and bought an illegal packet of cigarettes for $20.
Yeah.
I mean, it was no problem. He just asked for it and he got it. It's not as you don't even have to sort of deal with somebody down a back lane.
No need to skulk around.
No, it's amazing. I mean, it's kind of just it's got way beyond them. The governments have got absolutely no idea what to do about this.
Yeah,
I don't think there's enough policemen in the country to control it.
No, it reminds me of sort of SP bookmaking back in the day. But it's the hole in the budget. I think the hole in the budget just gone was like $9 billion. Now that's a hell of a lot of services. That's a lot of money we could chuck towards the housing crisis or health or whatever it is. I mean, this is just we've stuffed this up. Something shocking, and it's just hard to see the way out.
Tom says, I'd like to hear your input on the Helia MD's share sell down prior to releasing news of a major client loss to the market. Do you have a view on that?
Wasn't a great look. I mean, Helia, for those who don't know, they sell mortgage insurance. They've announced recently they might lose their biggest customer in Commonwealth Bank, but before that, the Helia MD sold, I think it was, I might get this wrong, $800,000 worth of stock.
$840,000 worth.
Thank you. Investors hate this sort of stuff, insider sales. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's worth watching. It is a red flag that lots of investors look to. I do find it sometimes amusing, though, Alan, that investors, if you asked an investor what's your sort of top 5 tips for investing in general, diversification would be up there. But they never seem to welcome that level of diversification from company founders and CEOs because they want them to stay fully invested in their company forever.
Yeah, it's fair enough. I must say, when I saw that thing about the Helia MD, I thought, oh, well, she probably would say that she didn't know they were going to lose Commonwealth Bank as a client when she sold. Yeah. Otherwise, she wouldn't have done it because it would have been insider selling. But the question I had is, if you didn't know, because it wasn't that long before, if you didn't know, why not? I mean, why isn't she in touch with their biggest client? If she didn't know that Commonwealth Bank was going to dump them, I reckon that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, probably the next question is a bit long, don't you think? Let's skip to Phil.
I'm going to jump ahead to Phil. Do you think there is not enough debate or analysis around the move to the 12% superannuation guarantee and its link to sedate wage growth and higher inflation? Costs to employers have gone up incrementally, which will be passed through to consumers, increasing inflation, but the wages received aren't keeping up. I always thought the 33% increase in the superannuation guarantee from 9 to 12% was excessive, but it doesn't seem to get much coverage or debate. The capital pool for super already feels bloated, and I feel this incremental increase would be better served in wages than in super. I think Phil's right on both counts. It doesn't get much debate, and it probably is worth debating.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It probably is because, as he points out, that was a big increase, 33% from 9 to 12%, and it's now it's a big inflow of money, which I think the super funds are having difficulty investing, aren't they?
Starting to have a bit of difficulty. But, there's some great analysis this week by UBS just on the sort of size of how super is inflating Australian household wealth. We're up to $660,000 per person. which is amongst the highest in the world. Sounds great, but you don't have to dig too deep to find some pain in the economy. And the other thing is that retirement benefits are now equivalent to about 11% of household income. So the super sector is definitely driving the economy along. Which I guess will make it interesting if we do see some big losses, investment losses in the super sector in the next few years. Let's hope not.
Probably got time for a couple more questions. Julian says, I'm an avid listener. Thank you very much. As Alan noted recently, Marcus Padley has cashed out most of their strategy portfolio as a safeguard against the global political and financial turmoil. Seems a reasonable strategy, even just for 6 months or so. I followed the same approach with my industry super fund in the past and considering converting to cash again for another spell now. With recessions and corrections, the talk of the town. What do you guys reckon? Oh, Julian, come on. It's not a good idea to try and time the market. You really, particularly if you're young and you've got tons of time, if you've got decades ahead of you, really it's fine. What you'll find is if you look at the share market graph, you'll find that, there's dips and downs along the way every 10 years or so, and we're probably in another one now, but it always recovers pretty quickly and goes back up and, it's very difficult to get the timing right.
Yeah, it is. It sounds like Julian's had a stab at it. I guess the good thing about this turmoil is you'll probably get a chance to come back in. I wouldn't want to be out of the market for too long. I mean, there's lots of stats that say you sort of miss the early stages of a recovery after a correction or a bear market. Then you can miss a lot of the upswing. So, yeah, to Alan's point, Julian, be pretty careful here. Alan, I'm going to skip down to a question from Joanna. Peter Dutton says Peter Dutton's going to make all the federal government workers work in the office, no more work from home. Do you think this will set the work trends for state governments and the private sector?
Interesting. Look, I'm inclined. My immediate reaction was no, but look, I suppose it's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, the private sector is already trying to get people back in the office.
Yep.
Because they don't like the working from home. I don't like the way that Peter Dutton's turning it into some kind of political macho thing. So I think that's rubbish. But
I think there's been a sort of shift in sentiment around work from home, but from employers this year. We're seeing more employers require more employees back in the office for more time, but it's nothing like it was, Alan, 7 years ago, back when you were talking on the Equity Mates podcast. It's very different. I mean, we're talking about people being required to come back to the office 3 or 4 days a week. Often there's other arrangements like 8 days over a fortnight or a certain number of days a month. So there is still a lot more flexibility than was possible. I think employers are still very open to, reaching sort of individual agreements with employees. There's just more flexibility in the system, which I think is good, particularly for female workers, for people with disabilities, people who, have other reasons for working from home, carers, for example. So I think we're actually going to swing back to a sort of, for in the private sector anyway, we're going to swing back to a sort of comfortable, what's the word? We're going to swing back to some middle ground where
some sort of new normal. You think?
Yeah, where employers and employees make this work. Both sides trust each other. I think most people work pretty hard most of the time. So I think that's what's happening in the private sector. The public sector is different because there was a big enterprise agreement with public servants, federal public servants, that enshrined working from home rights much more robustly than in the private sector. So I think even
I forgot about that.
Dutton's admitted he's got a few years before he can actually do anything about this. I'm with you. It seems to be a bit of copying the Doge movement in the US, which, if you believe the reports, might lose its talisman, Elon Musk, soon. So let's see how this plays out. I think we're seeing more people. You walk around the cities, Melbourne and Sydney. I've spent a bit of time in Sydney recently. There's a lot more people back in town, but there's still flexibility in lots of workplaces. So this is one where you can get it right, and can. I think companies are trying to figure it out. But I must say, Alan, the lack of science around this by companies is always fascinating to me. You know, we survey companies every year, ask CEOs, what are you doing? You know, and they've all got different answers. To your point, they all want people back in the office, I guess, because it's easier to see them and build culture and all that sort of thing. But I don't think there's a lot of data being collected. No one's really trying to track the productivity yet. It's really hard to do that, of course, but
I'll tell you what,
we can get a bit scientific about it.
It feels to me like the roads are much busier on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday than they are on Monday and Friday. What do you reckon?
The station car park for me is the great indicator, and it is so reliable. Monday, Friday, get a park where you want. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, trains in the car park a lot busier.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think working from home is becoming a bit more ad hoc as well, and it's kind of seems to be replacing sickies to some extent.
Maybe.
You know, like to the extent that people have sickies where they're not really sick, but there's they've got to do something, and they're going to just take a sickie because they've got to do something. So they'll say, I'm working from home instead, and they'll work from home most of the day, but they'll go and do whatever they have to do, or pick up the kids early, or maybe one of the kids is sick. So you have a sickie because the kids are sick, but actually the kid's kind of 7 or 8 years old and can actually amuse themselves while you're working.
Yeah. I think it comes down to being grown up about it.
Yeah.
That's what good employers do. If you're grown up about it, if you're prepared to give your staff a bit of flexibility, they'll be prepared to go to the extra mile for you when you need it.
Exactly.
And I think that's it's pretty freaking obvious, but I think that's where we want to get to. That's where good employers get to. And they were doing it before the pandemic, and they'll be doing it for many years.
We were always good employers at Business Spectator, weren't we?
Indeed. Oh, yeah. I don't remember working from home too often, but it was...
No, we didn't work from home then. That's true. Exactly. Yeah. That was back in 2007. But
we weren't set up for it either. And so I think,
yeah, that's true.
Everyone is set up for it now. Everyone appreciates a day working from home isn't lost because you've got access to all the systems. So,
and you got Zoom. We didn't have Zoom then.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think things have changed, and smart employers will embrace that change, and they can have the best of both worlds. They can get people in for the social and cultural aspects, and they can, they can have it all. Employers and I think if employees are prepared to give a bit, then they'll get the. They should get the same back.
James Thomson, the voice of reason there.
Yes. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thanks everyone for listening to today's episode of the Money Café. I'll be back next week with Stephen Main. Send in your questions to themoneycafe@eurekareport.com.au. Until then, I'm Alan Kohler, founder of Eureka Report and presenter and columnist for the ABC.
And I'm James Thomson, senior Chanticleer columnist at the Australian Financial Review. And this podcast is not 10% more expensive.